Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome all of you here for the HODGES Forum on International Affairs. My name is Robert Cox, and I serve as the director of the Walker Institute for International and Area Studies here at the University of South Carolina, and we're very pleased this evening to be working together with the Sunoco Department of International Business and the Darla Moore School to bring you tonight's event. I'd like to recognize all of the people whose hard work put this event together. They've done a lot over the past few weeks, and we're delighted for the efforts that they've done. I'd also like to recognize some of the distinguished visitors with us. First and foremost, His Excellency, Dr. MONCEF MARZOUKI, who's come to be with us here from Tunisia, and we're delighted to have you. I'll give him a more formal introduction a little bit later, but I want to recognize him first. Seated next to him here in the front, and you'll be hearing from him in a moment also, is former Governor of the state of South Carolina, Jim HODGES. So, Governor, thank you for being with us tonight. I'd also like to recognize Dr. Peter Bruce, Dean of the Darla Moore School of Business. I know I've seen him. He's sitting here tucked into the back, but he's here with us. So thank you all for being with us. Tonight, we are focusing on a small country that's recently written a big chapter in the history of democracy. Tunisia is a country of 11 million people on the Mediterranean Sea, tucked between Libya and Algeria. But it's made an important demonstration to the world, and that demonstration is that democracy and Islam can work effectively together. It's a really remarkable thing, and that we're going to hear more about tonight. To give you some background, in December of 2012, public discontent over corruption, economic stagnation, and a lack of political freedom boiled over into outright rebellion, sparked, literally, when a street vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi set himself on fire to protest harassment by the police. In a few weeks, the revolt in Tunisia brought down the government of President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, and the revolt had a regional effect. Throughout 2011, street protests became more and more pronounced throughout the Arab world. What started off as the Jasmine revolution in Tunisia became a wave of rebellions across the Middle East that was dubbed the Arab Spring. And that name was given by optimistic observers who thought it might be the end of the region's monarchies and autocratic regimes. But the promise of the Arab Spring was not fully realized. Tunisia was arguably the only country where the overthrow of the old order led to positive steps towards democracy. The purpose of tonight's discussion is to recount those remarkable events that changed Tunisia and to draw the lessons of this history both for the fate of democratic reforms throughout the Middle East, but also to recognize the strength of the human spirit. Our featured speaker is Dr. Mohamed MONCEF MARZOUKI. He'll be giving some remarks after Governor HODGES comes to share his thoughts with us. Let me tell you something about Governor HODGES. But first, let me say some housekeeping things. We're going to hear from Governor HODGES, then Dr. MARZOUKI. Then a panel of experts from USC is going to join us here on the stage, and we'll have a short roundtable discussion. After that, we're going to have question and answers from the audience. Now, I would like to ask you, if you have a question, to please write it down. There are a few graduate students where our helpers in the back, and they'll be coming up and down the aisles with some note cards and some pencils if you need them. Please write down your question and then give it back to them, because they'll be collecting those questions. We'll do that because we've got a lot to do in a short amount of time, and this seems like the easiest way to manage it. Also, I'd like to bring to your attention the fact that after the program is over, we will have a reception on the 18th floor at Top of Carolina. I'd invite all of you. You're welcome to meet more informally with Dr. MARZOUKI and share your thoughts about the evening's events. So please keep in mind the reception afterward. With that, let me start our program first by recognizing Jim HODGES, who served as the 114th governor of South Carolina from 1999 to 2003. He's the only Democrat to serve as governor since 1987. Governor HODGES' tenure was notable for, and I think it's notable for his initiatives on behalf of education. As governor of South Carolina, he established the education lottery, credited with providing more than 100,000 scholarships. He's also responsible for funding First Steps, a public-private preschool readiness program. Under his leadership, the South Carolina Department of Commerce achieved record-breaking economic development results. Governor Hodges served as the national co-chair of the Obama president campaign in 2008 and regularly advises political and business leaders on a wide range of state, regional, and national policy issues. He's been recognized with honorary doctorate degrees from the University of South Carolina, as well as South Carolina State University, the Citadel, Winthrop University, and Francis Marion University. Since 2003, he's been the CEO of HODGES Consulting, a business, government relations, and economic development consulting firm. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome our governor, former Governor Jim Hodges.
Thank you very much. That's a very nice introduction. I'm going to be brief because you're here to listen to Dr. Marzouki. But I do want to acknowledge my son Luke in the front row. There's a great reason to acknowledge him. Not only is he a USC graduate, but this is his inheritance that's paying for this event tonight. So he needs to be acknowledged for that. I think he's trying to make sure that Rachel and I don't write a bigger check. That's probably why he's seated in the front row. It's great to be here at my alma mater. My children, Luke attended USC as well. My younger son Sam is a student at the university. My mother taught here at the university for well over 30 years, so our roots run deep with the University of South Carolina. When we began talking, Rachel and I, last year about trying to initiate the HODGES Forum events, Jerry, you'll remember this discussion. It was about how we could bring provocative international speakers to our campus that would stimulate thought not only about international affairs, but about business. South Carolina is an international state. For well over 40 years, 50 years, we have led our country in international investment in South Carolina. When you look at the issues that we talk about, the global issues now, South Carolina has one of the most significant seaports in our country, in our world. And for that reason, things that happen globally are incredibly important to us economically, culturally, politically. It's really important, I think, that our flagship university bring in speakers who have done significant things internationally to try to continue to remind students about the global significance of our university and of our state. And Dr. Marzouki is indeed one of those speakers. Last night we had the chance to have dinner, and I introduced him as the George Washington of Tunisia. He was rather flattered by that. I think the word we heard was that George Washington was indeed the Dr. Marzouki of the United States, but we'll accept the introduction I provided, Dr. Marzouki. He is a historically important figure. When you think of what has happened in the world over the last 10 to 12 years, Dr. Marzouki, the role that he played in the revolution, the change in Tunisia and in the Arab world was significant. So hearing from someone like this, I think, is great for our students and great for our university. His thoughts about what's happening in the world right now are thoughts that we need to hear in the United States. What he thinks is happening, is going to continue to happen in the Arab world, I think is very significant for us as well. He indeed is, as I mentioned, a historical figure. We're really pleased to have him here tonight and to have this provocative discussion about international affairs, about Tunisia, and about the world. Dr. Marzouki.
I'm not Dr. Marzouki, but I do have the honor of introducing him to you. His Excellency, Dr. Mohamed MONCEF Marzouki, was the first president of Tunisia after the January 14th revolution in 2011. Upon the assumption of the presidency, Dr. Marzouki embarked on a mission to open the doors of the presidential palace through campaigns of transparency, participative governance, and by encouraging a safe public space for civic organizations to flourish. During his mandate, Dr. Marzouki was a voice of social and revolutionary activism, calling for respect for civil rights, curtailment of the security apparatus, and economic opportunity. He transformed the presidency into a position of service to the Tunisian public, occupying a middle ground between secularist and Islamist political standpoints, Dr. Marzouki created a dialogue between all political, social, and religious groups in Tunisia, clearing the ground for an inclusive, stable, and consensus-based democracy to take root. Dr. Marzouki is a doctor of medicine, a human rights activist, an author of numerous works on political philosophy in the Arab world. He was founder of the center-left Congress Party for the Republic, which was one of the parties that formed the government coalition that he led. Dr. Marzouki spent 2 decades in exile due to his family's political activism early in his life. He returned to Tunisia in 1979 as a lecturer in medicine, but was sacked in 2000 for his political activism. He then joined the Tunisian League for the Defense of Human Rights and became an advocate for human rights. In 1993, he ran for president against the former dictator, Zine El Abidine Ben Ali. He was subsequently imprisoned and put in solitary confinement. A national and international campaign and the intervention of South African President Nelson Mandela led to his release in June of 1994. In 2000, he was again sentenced to prison, and following another international outcry, Dr. Marzouki fled to France, where he continued his struggle in exile. Dr. Marzouki finally returned to Tunisia in 2011 after Ben Ali fled the country and he was elected by the Tunisian National Constituent Assembly as the first president of the newly democratic Tunisia. This is a man with a very distinguished past who has seen some of the world's the deepest and the darkest, but also the most vibrant of the American spirit. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to the University of South Carolina.
I feel flattered, but a little bit intimidated, by all what has been said. Please, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the HODGES Forum of International Affairs for this opportunity to talk about my country and what's happening in this part of the world. First of all, I was asked by the organizer of this meeting to answer very difficult questions. What lessons can be drawn from the so-called Arab Spring and from the so-called Jasmine Revolution? And this question reminds me of the answer of former Chinese Prime Minister Zhou Enlai. He was asked the same question: what do you think about French Revolution? And he said, well, it's probably too early to make a final judgment. So you can imagine that I also can respond the same way. What are just 6 years in the life of countries like Egypt or Tunisia? It's probably too early to make a final judgment about what's going on in our Arab world. But I will nevertheless dare to put forward some ideas, not conclusion, just some ideas about the whole process, drawn from my own experience as political actor and also as an intellectual, watching very carefully what's happening in this world for more than 3 decades. Well, let me start with the bad news, because unfortunately we have a lot of them. First bad news: the cost of what is called Spring and Jasmine and so forth. In fact, the cost is extremely high. Currently, we have about 7 million displaced people in Syria. Syria is completely destroyed as a country, probably as a state, as a society also. In Libya, we have a civil war, extremely hard civil war with thousands of people displaced. We have had more than 2 million refugees in Tunisia coming from Libya. In Yemen, they have got now famine. They have got also thousands of people displaced. In Egypt, currently they have more than 60,000 people in jail because the situation is worse than before, than at the time of Mubarak, the former dictator. Even in Tunisia, we have had only 300 people killed, 2,000 wounded. So you see that the price people have to pay for freedom is extremely high. This is why I always, when I heard about the Jasmine and the spring and so on, said, hey, it's not the most accurate image. We better talk about volcanoes or earthquake or something like that. But not at all Jasmine and not at all spring. It's bloody spring, very bloody spring. So the second bad news is this probably is just the beginning of it. I doubt that this bloody process would stop. I'm afraid that we are going to have more and more people killed in Syria, in Libya, and I don't see the end of the civil war in Libya. I don't see the end of the civil war in Syria. And it will probably take years, maybe decades. And we can expect also that other Arab countries, we will have the same fate, because people took to the street in Tunisia, in Libya, in Syria, because they couldn't accept anymore to suffer from corruption, from poverty, etc. And you have the same things in every country, in the other countries. I'm not going to nominate them, but you have the same problem everywhere. So I expect that the volcanoes, would burst in many other Arab countries. So we are just at the beginning of the whole process of destruction, of civil wars and unrest, etc., etc. The third bad news is that probably the problem is that the corrupt elite that led to this situation didn't get the message, except just in one country, I think, in Morocco. The king of Morocco, got the message, and he began some political reforms. And this probably would lead to the lower the tensions in the Moroccan society. But elsewhere, nobody got the message. On the contrary, we experienced that some Gulf states, put a lot of money to block the process, to put a lot of money, to corrupt the elites in Egypt, in Tunisia, to block the whole process and to revert to the former situation. And that means that they didn't get the message. They didn't understand that they have to accelerate reforms so to avoid what happened in Tunisia, what happened in Syria, etc. But unfortunately, I do believe that they don't get the message. Same thing for the Western government. I was very surprised when I was charged the position of French government or the German government or Italian government or US government, they were very surprised by what's happened in our region. And I think they were not very happy. And this surprised me, because you expect from democratic government they would be happy and they would, they would support you. And so we didn't get any support. Probably because the Western government were surprised by the fact that free elections, gave power to the Islamists. So for them, all this was happening in the Arab world was an Islamist revolution. In fact, it was not. It was a democratic revolution. But free elections, gave the power to the Islamist trend, and this is the game. You have to accept it. So, and maybe also because Western government, for them, the main problem is stability, and they think that stability, combating terrorism, etc., just is a matter of you need hard dictatorship, no matter what's the cost for the local population. So here also, I think that the message has not been. They didn't get the message, and I see that for the moment, when I see the U.S. government supporting a dictator in Egypt, worse than the former one, accepting a human massive violation in Egypt, while talking about promoting democracy, I think this is a huge problem. So now, the good news, because there are some good news. Well, the first good news is that we in Tunisia, fortunately, I'm going to explain why in Tunisia, because there are some structural reasons. We in Tunisia, we have proved that it's possible to reconcile democracy and Islam. We have proved that we can have national dialogue. We have proved that we can lead a peaceful transition. We have proved that we can also have free and fair elections. We can have a peaceful transfer of power, etc. So it means that somewhere in this world, in this complex and difficult Arab world, you can have some part where things can be good. Should we be? Well, many people, you know, are talking about the Tunisian model. Last month I have been in Sudan, and I saw that they are having also their national dialogue, and I have a lot of discussion with Sudanese politicians saying, hey, the government is cheated because he's doing just what you did in Tunisia, but he's discussing with only his friends and not with political opponents. So in Libya also, we always heard Libyans saying, explain how you did this national dialogue, how it worked, and what advice can you give us? So we have it. I must be modest, but I must be also frank. This Tunisian model is probably not. I always say to my Sudanese friends or Libyan friends, look, you have to invent your own model. You have to accept that you have to invent, because Tunisia is not Sudan, Tunisia is not Libya, and you have to invent. You can do it, and you must do it. So the good news is that this Tunisian model is carefully watched by everywhere in the Arab world, and people do believe that this model can bring them peace, and I hope that this will be the outcome. The third, but the most important good news, I think, from all what happened for me, is that we have discovered during this revolution our own youth. I call it internet generation, or the e-generation, or Facebook generation, or whatever you know. But this youth is the most connected youth in the world with internet. When you see the figures, you will be surprised, because the Arab youth is the most connected in the world, even more than here in the United States or Europe. And I do believe that this e-generation, living already in an e-democracy, will be the generation that will build up new democratic structure everywhere. And you will have this e-generation everywhere, in Saudi Arabia, in Morocco, in Algeria, everywhere. And for this generation, you know, dictatorship is already dead, you know, in their heart and mind. And I do believe that the future, even if it's extremely difficult, I do believe that this generation will bring us and will be able to set up what I'm fighting for more than 3 decades, and what I see that extremely difficult. I would like to end this remark, because probably we're going to have more details, more discussion later on, by saying that the process now in this Arab world is extremely difficult, bloody, complex, but we do believe that it will be, well, sometimes when I see the amount of destruction, I say to myself, probably we have to destroy this. What's destroyed currently is the state's mentality, social links, and so forth. And we have to pay the price of this destruction, because the first step, you have to destroy something, then you can build something new on its ruin. This is exactly what we are doing. So to finish, I would say that you must be interested, excuse me to tell you to speak, you must be interested in what's happening in this world, this Arab world, because I think what's going on in the Middle East and North Africa has a huge impact on what's going on everywhere, because imagine that we have more terrorism attacks and more civil wars, etc. This would impact what's happening in Europe. This would impact what's happening in the United States, and vice versa. What's happening here in the United States is extremely important for us. I must admit that I am a little bit scared about what the new administration, I don't know exactly what would be. It's politics. I'm afraid that will worsen our situation, you know, and that we maybe we will face more and more difficulties in, you know, in conducting this this difficult transition to democracy. Anyway, we would do it. Believe it, we would do it, and we would like to rely on your friendship and your support. Thank you all.
Space for you up here. Just come on up. Well, thank you, Dr. Marzouki. These are some wonderful comments about that are both optimistic and honest and realistic about the prospects. And what we have to continue our program is some experts here at the University of South Carolina who have prepared some questions and are going to conduct a little bit of a roundtable discussion. Let me introduce them. Starting immediately to Dr. Marzouki's right, we have Professor Gerald McDermott, who's a professor of international business at the Darla Moore School of Business. He specializes in international business and political economy. He received a PhD in political science at MIT. His research focuses on the impact of industrial networks on the creation of economic governance institutions in post-communist countries, and currently is doing work in South America using both comparative and statistical survey methods to examine socio-political conditions under which societies build new innovative capacities to achieve sustained upgrading in their industries. He's published widely in high-profile academic journals, and his book, Embedded Politics, which was published by the University of Michigan Press, was a finalist for the American Political Science Association's 2003 Woodrow Wilson Foundation Award for the best book on government politics and international affairs. Next to him is Hamid Khan, who here at the University of South Carolina is Deputy Director of the Rule of Law Collaborative. Mr. Khan joined the Rule of Law Collaborative in January of 2015, and he's also an adjunct professor here at the university. He's a National Security Fellow at the Truman National Security Project and a non-resident senior fellow at the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies in Saudi Arabia. He's previously served as a senior rule of law program officer at the United States Institute for Peace. Hamid Khan has a law degree from the University of Michigan. Prior to law school, he was a Harry S. Truman Presidential Scholar and worked for the U.S. House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, as well as the Office of U.S. Senator Alan Simpson and the Office of David Alton in the British House of Commons. While in private legal practice, Mr. Khan served as counsel of record for 5 detainees at the U.S. Naval Facility at Guantanamo Bay. He also has a direct connection to Tunisia because during the last elections he served for the Carter Center as an election observer in Tunisia. And finally, but not to be the least, Professor Josef OLMERT is an adjunct professor of political science here at the University of South Carolina. He's been the director of the government press office and advisor to then Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir during the First Gulf War and the International Peace Conference in Madrid. In 1999, he also served as a policy advisor to former Defense Minister Moshe Arens. He's got extensive media experience. He pens regular columns for several Israeli newspapers, as well as here in the United States for the Huffington Post. Dr. OLMERT, who holds a PhD from the London School of Economics and Middle Eastern History, has authored 3 books on the Middle East, as well as numerous articles in academic and popular journals. He's also scion to one of the most prominent political families in Israel, son of a former Knesset member, the late Mordecai OLMERT, and a brother of the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud OLMERT. This is our panel for this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin with the first question. And if I've got my Dr. OLMERT.
Thank you very much, President Marzouki. You know, in America, people keep their titles for life. So for us, you are the president. And also, I would like to welcome my students here. They all came in force. And I have nothing because I asked them to come, but that's great. Your country played a great role in Middle East politics already in the 19th century. It's a least known fact, but already in 1861, it was the first country in the Middle East to have a constitution. And then the party that led you to independence was called the Dustur, Hizb al-Dustur, the Party of Constitution. And if I may say, also in 1965, Habib Bourguiba was the first Arab leader to acknowledge in public the idea of making peace with Israel. But my question to you is, and you touched upon it from the element of pros and cons, it is, as you said, only 300 casualties in Tunisia. It's 200 too many, of course. But compared to other countries, it's, why is it that Tunisia really found a way to smoothly pass to democratically elected government, middle-of-the-road Islamist or Islamic government? What exactly is the feature of your society and politics which made it so possible?
Well, I'm very often asked this question, and I don't think we succeeded because we are smarter, or we are more tolerant, or we are more anything. I think it was easy. It was easy when you compare our situation to the Syrian situation, for example. Tunisia is a homogeneous society. 99% of Tunisians are Arab Muslims, Sunni. This is very important. When you compare it to Syria, for instance, where you have a patchwork of religions or ethnicity and so forth, of course it's easy. It's easiest to have national dialogue when you have this homogeneous society. Tunisia also is a middle-class society, and this is very important because when you compare to countries like Egypt, where you have a lot of poor and a tiny minority of extremely rich, I think it's easiest in a middle-class society, to reach consensus than when you have a wide gap between rich and poor. Tunisia is also a small country. This also can play an important role. Everybody knows everybody, so it's easy to talk when you are a small community, political community. Tunisia is also probably the most westernized Arab society because we are very close to Europe. In fact, we have extremely important relationship with Europe since 3,000 years. You know that the first occupation, European occupation of Tunisia, was in 146 before Christ, when Carthage was destroyed by Rome and when it became a part of the Roman Empire. And then 2,000 years later, we became part of the French Empire. So we are very close, very linked to Europe, and this probably played an important role. So we did it for a structural reason, and not because we are smarter or more tolerant or something like that. I would like to believe it, but I don't think it's true. I hope I have answered your question.
Hamid, you want to go?
Yes. President Marzouki, we've talked at some length about some of the changes that Tunisia made to its constitution, and to sort of set the stage. One of the biggest challenges that concerns Americans is the potential for terrorism, and of course, as we've already spoken, many Muslims have suffered from the hands of terrorism as well. But there was a unique feature within the Tunisian constitutional process that I'd like you to elaborate on, and that deals with this concept known as takfirism, declaring the right of the individual or a religious leader in particular to declare someone as a non-believer and therefore potentially make them within the bounds of possible vengeance or a terrorist attack. Al-Qaeda uses this, ISIS uses this, but Tunisia did something fairly unique, which no other constitution and no other Muslim majority country has done, which is to actually criminalize this concept of takfirism. And I was wondering if you would share some thoughts about what led to this process and perhaps the why for why this is done?
We have had an important discussion among political leaders about this question. And we have a lot of problem with two words, takfir and the other one is sharia. Takfir means what you have said, that you would say this man is not a believer, so he is an outlaw. And the second, the problem of sharia, that we will live under a divine law. And of course, we have had a huge discussion between Islamists and secularists. Fortunately, this is also another characteristic of this Tunisian society. Because we are a middle-class society, etc., we also have moderate secularists and moderate Islamists, and this is extremely important. And the moderate Islamists, we told them, look, we are not going to accept the constitution if you want this word Sharia to be enshrined, and they accepted. They accepted also that freedom of conscience would be enshrined in the constitution. So we didn't have a lot of problem, in fact, because of this. I would say that I must add that, in fact, we have had this kind of discussion under the dictatorship. You know, under the dictatorship, we have had a lot of meeting, dreaming of the new Tunisia, inclusive government, inclusive society, etc., etc. And I remember one of the many discussions I have had with Rashid Ghannouchi is about those. I said, look, if we want to build new Tunisia, you have to forget about takfir, about Sharia, and so on. And he said, okay, but you had to forget about the fact that Islam must be ignored. And I said, no, we are going to accept that Islam is the religion of the state, but that will be all. We will have secular laws, we will have freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom, etc., etc. Unfortunately, we reached an agreement. But let me say that the only regret about our constitution, the only regret is that I didn't succeed in having, you know, as you probably know, I am a human rights activist, and I was always extremely opposed to the death penalty. And we have had a huge discussion about death penalty, and the Islamists said, no, we cannot go that further. And it was not possible for us to enshrine the death penalty ban in the constitution. But I hope the next time we will do it. And we will be the first country, Arab country, to abolish death penalty.
Thank you, Mr.
Oh, I'd be glad to. Dr. Marzouki, I was struck by the role that technology played in the Arab Spring. This was perhaps the first Facebook revolution. One of the and you mentioned it also in your remarks about how connected the younger generation is today. And that was true not just in Tunisia, but across the Arab world. The technology of Facebook, Twitter, allowed people to organize, to find other people of similar sentiments, and to bring protest into the street more effectively than they could have, not knowing about all the other people who shared their concerns. I wonder, as you set out to build an open government that was transparent and connected to the people, if you also found the same technology useful as a tool in reaching out to the population, and if maybe you could say something about how you did that.
Yes, well, yes, it's our revolution, the Arab Revolution, are probably the first revolution in history using modern technology, as you said. And I believe that the future of our revolution would be in the internet. Why? Because, as I told you, our youth is extremely connected. Sometimes they are a little bit too connected because they are all the day and all the time. And sometimes we need them to be in the street and the reality. But it's the first step. What we tried also during the 3 years I was president is to have an e-government, you know, tried to write the information, that all the information would be on the internet, so any citizens can go and see what's going on in the Paris, have all the information about the politics of the government, etc., etc. And the whole process is continuing, and I hope that we will have more transparent government, because I do believe that it's the best way to combat corruption. You probably know that the social disease in our country, the most important social disease in our country is corruption. And now you have a lot of people now, denouncing corruption by internet, and then we have the information about this politician or that politician everywhere, the same day. And this would be a terrible weapon to fight against corruption and repression and so forth. So this is why I'm very optimistic about the fact that the generation will be the generation that will be with democratic system.
Before I ask my question, do we want to starting to collect questions? Yeah.
But go ahead and ask.
Okay. Let me just bring together some of these themes then, because at the end of your talk, you talked about the importance of tearing down the existing state structures. But one thing we know about democratic processes, and as a student on post-communist struggles and also in Latin America, we cannot have a tabula rasa to build a new society, right? So we know that. And indeed, and I'm going to get to something to think about foreign powers, the great powers, whether it's the United States, in different parts of Europe or in Asia, in how they're looking at your neighbors, frankly, your neighbors in the region. Because what they fear is exactly that. They fear, well, we should do nothing almost because of the risk of collapse. So it seems that the risk of or the idea of a path towards something new, which begins with full teardown, is a highly risky path. So then, as outsiders, how would you, what are 2 or 3 things then we should be focusing on? When I say we, let's just say, the Western powers to begin with, when they're looking at an Egypt or a Libya or even an Algeria. Let's leave the Syria thing as sort of aside for a moment. What should they then focus on?
Well, look, if you take the Tunisian case, for instance, of course we didn't destroy the state. We improved we tried to improve it, and we kept the old structure, and we are trying to deal with what we call the deep state, because the deep state is an extremely important thing. Because when you get rid of the dictator, you don't get rid of dictatorship, because dictatorship is not just one person and his family. Dictatorship is a whole network of civil servant, etc., etc. So, but in Tunisia, we could tackle the problem peacefully and progressively, etc., etc. But look to the Syrian case. Syrian case, it's a hopeless case. You can do nothing. So you have to destroy this state, even if the price is extremely high, to build something new. In fact, you have it's not up to you. It's you have to consider the situation. The situation is quite different from one country. If it's possible, of course, to have this peaceful and slow transition to democracy, it's okay. But sometimes it's not possible. And in fact, look what's happening in Syria. Bashar al-Assad refused everything from the beginning. The Syrian revolution was as peaceful as the Tunisian revolution at the beginning. During 6 months, people were in the street shouting just for we want more freedom, we want peace, etc. But they didn't want to destroy the state. But look how the dictator responded to this peaceful protest by the mass killing, by war crimes. So what can you do with this kind of state? It's a matter of
well,
balance.
maybe that's an extreme case. So let's
Yes,
go to like
yes.
say Egypt, which is not easy, or your other neighbors, in the sense that is there something that could be from the outside built up not just torn down, meaning like, so there's theories about building up and funding civil society groups.
I think
Or is that an illusion?
Yes, no. In Egypt also, I think it's you can use the Tunisian models. In fact, it depends on the way the local elite or the corrupt elite would respond to your question. If they say, okay, we got the message now, we will try to introduce some political reforms, some social reform, etc. We can wait. Let's be patient, etc., etc. We say, okay, but if they respond by harsh repression, no, it's up to them.
Okay. Wow. How do you want to continue?
Did one of our other panelists want to?
I would like to make a point that often is escaping the attention of those who observe the current situation in the Middle East, and this is that, interestingly enough, or ironically enough, the more stable systems are the monarchies.
Yeah.
And that's simply a fact. And I would connect it, therefore, to a question that I lecture my students about all the time. They must be bored listening it here again. Question of political legitimacy and all that comes with it. And I will connect it also to the question that you raised when you answered my point, or referred to my point about the demographic homogeneity of Tunisia as opposed to some other countries. You know, I've had the pleasure of negotiating peace with the Syrians. And I remember that we were sitting along a table and there was somebody who was sitting behind the Syrian delegation looking all the time, and they would not smile to us and shake hands with us. And it was when I understood that there's not going to be peace. He was the only Alawite in the delegation. All the rest of them were Sunni Muslims, but he was the guy who decided. So the question of ethnic and demographic composition of the population is of immense significance, and I think that Tunisia is lucky to have 99%. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So I really believe in the future of Tunisia in that sense. Yeah.
We've got some questions from the audience, so let me start with a few of these. How would you respond to someone saying that Islam is incompatible with Western values or the Judeo-Christian tradition?
It's nonsense.
That is very clear. Here's a question on women's rights. How do you see the role of women's rights, including reproductive choice, as a potential tool for forging consensus and enabling a reformist approach to Islam, both as a personal religion and a political player in the Middle East?
Well, Tunisia is known for, when you compare it to many other Arab countries, women's rights are, I wouldn't say they're totally respected and so on, but this would be not quite true. But we do believe that equality between women and men, etc. But I would like to stress one point. I'm I'm physician. I worked on public health, and my opinion is that the problem of women in the Arab world is the problem of poverty, mainly of social-economic rights. Everybody is talking about gender rights, and we don't have this problem in Tunisia. The gender rights are okay, the equality, but the reality is that women are discriminated by poverty. And the most important thing for me to promote women's rights is to promote their rights to jobs and better education, better health, etc., etc.
Thank you. Here's a question asking for a comparison with the Egyptian case. What prevented the Tunisian military from intervening in politics during the transition?
Mm-hmm. Luckily we are far from Israel, so we don't need military, etc., etc.
Luckily for us, we would like you to be neighbors.
The problem with the Arab dictatorship, you know, that they use this argument of Israel, you know, first to, you know, to spend the few resources we have on weapons, and second, saying, look, we have to fight against Israel, so don't talk about democracy, don't talk about everything. And this is why I think our backwardness in the Arab world is due mainly to this the question that the few resources have been invested in weapons and so forth, and that we have got this military dictatorship using the pretext of Israel, you know, to oppress our people. Now, why don't we have this? Our military in Tunisia is professional, disciplined, and not corrupt military, and it's a chance also. You know, after during the revolution, the army refused to oppress the people, or refused to shoot, etc., and protected the. We were more afraid from the police than from the army. In fact, the army protected us against the police, and. Now we are very proud to have this professional and disciplined and Republican army. It's our chance in Tunisia. When compared to Egypt, where I can say that it's a corrupt, politicized, and extremely harmful army to the Egyptian nation.
Thank you. We have a number of questions here that are asking for comparisons with your neighbors. So this one is actually written in French, and my French is poor, but I think it's asking for a comparison with Morocco.
Pouvez-vous, Monsieur Marzouki, nous comparer l'expérience démocratique de la Tunisie avec celle du Maroc? May I respond in French? Well, it's about comparison of Morocco and Tunisia. I told you that the only man who got the message, the only leader who got the message of the Tunisian revolution is the King of Morocco, Mohammed VI. He got the message, and he began important political reforms, and he's the only one, because the other leaders, other kings or princes, didn't get the message at all. The contrary, they funded the counter-revolution, and they think that probably by funding the counter-revolution they will block the whole process, and they are mistaken. So I think that Morocco is on the good track. Because if they succeed in having good political reform, and if they can also fight against corruption, then Morocco would be a stable state, a democratic state, and probably would be a Moroccan model also, not only a Tunisian model in our region.
And now a comparison with Turkey, where an effort to promote moderate Islam is steered more fundamental. Why do you think that is the case, that sometimes these movements move more fundamental rather than maintain a moderate vision of Islam?
Well, for the first decades of President Erdogan, and the Turkish experience was very promising, and we, as Arab, we admired very much the Turkish model, because they have very good economic growth and political stability and freedom, etc., etc. And I hope this model will be available for the next decade, because I'm a little bit afraid of what's happening now. You know, something. I'm not going to talk about reverting to dictatorship, but because this is not true. But I see that Turkey is extremely challenged, and the response of President Erdogan is a little bit, you know, harsh.
Now a comparison with the United States. Tunisia is a world leader in giving shelter to refugees from civil wars and conflicts, as you've mentioned. What can the U.S. learn from Tunisia on these humanitarian issues?
Be more hospitable, you know.
Oh, great, thank you. How do you think people in Tunisia respond to the elections that are taking place around the world, such as the recent presidential election in the US and the upcoming elections in France?
We're frightened, scared, and because we do know that a huge impact of U.S. politics, the French politics have a huge impact on our region. So we're afraid, of course, of government would say, look, we're more interested in stability than in promoting human rights and democracy, because we have suffered this kind of politics for many decades. So that means that, look, the Egyptian model, for instance, now you see this man, this awful dictator in Sisi, General Sisi, we had put an end to the first democratic elections in Egypt. This man is fully supported by the United States, and we are afraid that this would be the same case elsewhere. And we do know by our own experience that this would feed, the terrorism and not stop it. Because about terrorism, I would like to remind you that the most important victims of terrorism are Arabs and Muslims. 90% of people killed by terrorist attacks are Arabs and Muslims. This must be always kept in mind. And that the policy of supporting dictator because this would lead to stability, I think it's an error. It's completely wrong. To stop the wave of terrorist attacks, etc. Of course, it takes time, but it's in promoting in social and economic development, because the roots of terrorism is mainly poverty. This must be, the roots of terrorism is not religion, it's poverty. Religion is just, the framework of the pretext, but in fact, the poverty and humiliation and repression are the seeds of so when I hear about U.S. government or French government saying that's not our business, it's yours. Now we want stability right now, and this is done by dictator. I said no, you are going to feed terrorism, and you will have to pay, also have a price for that, for this error.
Here's a question that follows up on the issue of terrorism. In the United States, the current administration has proposed cuts to the State Department budget, particularly in the area of foreign aid. How do you think this would affect counterterrorism globally?
I think it's a counterproductive measure. I do believe that the contrary which should be done.
A question about the Jasmine Revolution, and it's a philosophical question. What were the relative importance of moral versus economic grievances as a catalyst for the revolution?
I didn't understand the question.
Were people concerned about economic issues, or were they concerned about moral issues?
Oh, both. I think, in fact, there is a link between moral and economic situation, because corruption, is widely, as you know, probably was the main reason of the revolution. And corruption is not a matter of wealth distribution; it's a matter of morality. And people were extremely, shocked by the way the president and his wife and his brother were using the state. And I think, about morality, many people don't understand why the first time we have had elections in Tunisia or in Egypt, Islamists were chosen, And many people thought here in the West that it's because Tunisian or Egyptian are good believers and they would give power to the Islamists because they are Islamists. It's completely, it's not true. In fact, for Tunisians and for Egyptians who elected for the first time Islamists, the idea is that probably those people, because they are religious people, they would probably be not corrupt people. It was for moral reason and not for religious reason. And now, for instance, in Tunisia, people would say hey, we have experienced those Islamists in power, and we know that they didn't do much to fight against corruption. So probably the next election, Islamists in Egypt or even in Tunisia, they would probably not be the winner.
A question about your own background. What was the most influential aspect of your life that you would give credit to turning you into a human rights advocate?
Well, as I told you, I'm a physician, neurologist. I began to work with disabled children, and spent many years working with disabled children, and discovered that their problem is not only a medical problem, it's also social and economic problem. So I began to work within NGOs dealing with social and psychological needs of this population. And then from the children's rights or disabled rights, I went to the human rights as a whole, because I was elected in 1989, head of the Tunisian Human Rights League. And at that time, Ben Ali took over, and then began torture and massive human rights violations. So I find myself, facing a new situation, and then I became a human rights activist. In 2000, I understood that to combat human rights violation, you need to go in politics, because we can write down as many reports on torture as you want. You can claim, you can give lecture, etc., etc. This would stop torture. I said to myself, if I want to stop torture, we have to go on politics. Governor HODGES, you know that politics, you can do many things more than when you are just an intellectual protesting against this or against that. And this is, this is how things happen. I didn't decide that when I was a young doctor that I would become president of Tunisia. I decided, first of all, to work within my own field, but the life is that you begin and then you don't know how things would end.
Well, we're glad they worked out the way they did. What assurances can you give to outside international businesses to invest in your country?
Well, stability is Tunisia is currently a stable country, and I think we have also an independent judiciary. We have freedom of press, we have freedom of expression, freedom of association, etc. So the rule of law in Tunisia is at its beginning, but I think we are going to consolidate this situation. So please come and invest. We will come here.
We have several questions that are comparing with other countries in the region, and this one's about Saudi Arabia. How do you think countries like Saudi Arabia, whose very foundations and culture were formed via an authoritarian leadership, can adopt democratic and in turn non-sectarian principles?
But they have the same problem as I told you. They have a youth extremely connected, open to the world. And I think this youth will never accept to live like their fathers or their grandfathers. It's a matter of time, and Saudi Arabia also will change dramatically.
What is the role of education and an educated population in forming democracy?
Of course, if the transition in Tunisia were easier than the rest of the Arab world, it's because we have an educated population. While in Libya, unfortunately, because of the level of education, they have to face the problem. Of course, it's better than to have an educated population than to have an uneducated population to lead the transition to democracy. That's obvious.
I'd like to give the rest of our panelists a chance to respond. We've had quite a wide-ranging discussion at the moment, and I wonder if
President Marzouki, I was wondering about one of the key aspects that you had mentioned about U.S. foreign policy, specifically toward many countries in the Middle East. It seems to me that many are interested in the idea of stability, and that somehow a more stable country will somehow yield benefits. Now, for those here in the United States, it would seem like it would be beneficial for us to look to these countries to be stable so that they can be receptive to any type of U.S. interests and that they can be secure. What is your argument then to U.S. policymakers for the kind of chaos that you've already seen? If from a political point of view, it seems to make little sense to invite the kind of chaos that we are seeing, and for example, in places like the Middle East. So what, therefore, is the compelling argument that you would make if you had those policymakers and those advocates for stability?
The problem is that, policymakers in the United States or in Europe, they work on the, short-term time. And for us, for a politician, who we've elected for just 5 years or 10 years, what is important is now and here. So, of course, he would be interested in having a good dictator in Egypt or in Libya, because for the next few years, in his mandate, he will get stability. But this political actor, US or French, don't realize that this way of doing is extremely dangerous, because he will have this form of stability right now, but for the next 10 years, 20 years, he's going to no, not him, but the next generation of American would have to pay the price of this so-called stability, because there will be volcano eruption, there will be earthquake, there will be refugees, there will be etc., etc. The problem is in the Western democracy, nobody is in charge of the long term. And this is, I don't know if you agree with me, but I think it's a structural defect of any democratic system everywhere. Because when you are elected for 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, you would just consider the 10 years of your mandate, and wouldn't foresee for the future. So, and we are paying the price of this kind of policy. Building a democracy is a matter of generation. It takes time. So you have to bet on the future. You have to accept that if you work now, you maybe have a difficult situation right now, but you will in the next 20 years or 30 years, you will have results. And this is not the way of thinking of most politicians, unfortunately.
Let me follow that up with a sort of flip it around a bit. So imagine the UN could appoint you as a mediator or to build national dialogue in different parts of the Middle East. And thinking about the events of the last 6-7 years, one of the arguments for the stability or the fear that people have, to be more precise, is they say, well, look, that's very nice. The problem is the Muslim Brotherhood is too radicalized, and maybe we made mistakes and everybody made mistakes, but now there's no going back. So we can't allow, and by the way, there are variants of this story, say throughout Latin America and 20th century democracies. We really can't have open elections in these countries because this group will come back and we can't trust them. And the institutions aren't strong enough, and therefore we'll just put a lid on it and we'll get back to it in 10 years. So, but in this case, particularly the Muslim Brotherhood in some of these countries, particularly in Egypt and elsewhere, how would you begin a discussion to say, no, a national dialogue is possible in these contexts? What evidence would you give of that?
Do you have faith in democracy? Do you believe in democracy? So if you believe in democracy, we have to accept the rules of the game. You were talking about the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. They have been elected fairly in fair, free elections. But just 1 year after the SCC, have this coup, and now more than 60,000 people are in jail in Egypt. So how can you accept that a dictator, backed by the US, backed by the French government, and so forth. How can you accept, when you are a Democrat, to back such a man, such a regime, and you don't? I think that most of the Islamist regime in Egypt would have probably lost elections if if thing was done in a normal way. But putting an end by a coup to this democratic experimentation in the name of stability, or in the name of whatever you want, I think it was an error. It was an error, and I would advise everywhere that, look, you have to accept the result of any fair and free elections, and you have to monitor, the situation afterward. If those guys would be referred to the dictatorship, then you can move, but you have to let them do the job. You have to judge them on what they are doing, and you have to accept the result of the new election. This is what I did. I lost the elections. I have accepted that, okay, Tunisians want somebody else, okay, but I think if you don't accept the rules, if you don't abide by the rules you have invented yourself, how can you accept that other people would abide or would accept them?
I need to tell you that my only disappointment with Tunisia recently was that you lost in the African Soccer Cup. I mean, compare it with our achievement, the Gamehawks in basketball. So you see, I mean, we are a university of winners. But but coming back to the structural issues, something very interesting is happening now, that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is preparing a 5-year plan to the time after oil. And there are two issues that are being aroused here that might be generally or regionally structural, and I'm interested in your opinion about that. And this is that if we see a crisis of instability that is caused, as you say, primarily by economic reasons and all that, which leads also to mass migration to Europe and all that comes with it, what are we expecting to see if indeed the Saudis are right in their dire predictions and the oil importance of the Middle East in the rest of the world will be decreased dramatically, as the signs show that they are? And that leads me to a more specific question about Tunisia, that maybe the bigger advantage, perhaps, if I may say so, is that only 11 million people. With 11 million people, tourism and all that comes with it, you can still build an economy. How can Egypt, for example, really improve its economy with over 90 million people when they already exhausted their oil production or reserves? What can really happen in that sense? What will change the structural economic situation of those countries to create a sense of people that don't need to leave and go to other countries?
Well, as Tunisia is concerned, I always say that fortunately we didn't have oil. Fortunately, we didn't have oil because we had to rely on our skills, work, etc., because oil has been really a catastrophe for a country like Libya and some other countries. Well, for Egypt, I think that the main problem everywhere is corruption. Millions and millions and billions of dollars, have been stolen from the Egyptian people by corruption, by corrupted elite. And I can assure you that if we can stop this hemorrhage, of corruption everywhere, we will have enough resources, to make. But corruption means also that in this country we don't have independent judiciary, that in this country we have unrest, etc., etc. So if you stop this hemorrhage, if you stop this, first, people would be patient, would accept that, okay, we are poor, but we are sharing what we have, etc. But people would never accept the situation if they see that the amount, the level of corruption. I can assure you that without corruption, I won't say that we will become a rich state, but I can assure you that we will have enough resources to have a sane economy and have a good growth. This is my belief and my opinion.
Let me ask just one last question.
Yes.
I'd like to know if you were writing a handbook for somebody who was taking over a government after a revolution. What would you say is the first thing you have to do and the first thing you have to not do?
Well, the first thing you have to know is that you will not be re-elected. This is the first. I can assure you that this is very important because the level of expectation is extremely high. You inherit of the deep state will block you, and people are waiting everything. They want everything now, and so it's difficult, to be a leader in any country, but it's extremely difficult to be a leader in this transitional period. So I would tell him that do your job, but don't expect to be reelected. It's not important. You have just to do your what has to be done. You will be insulted, you will be criticized, it will be a very difficult situation for you, for your family, but you need to be there, you need to do your job, and you expect that history probably would be your revenge after you leave. The people would think, oh, this guy wasn't that bad, and this is this is only the only thing I can say.
Well, Dr. Marzouki, thank you so much for being here with us this evening, and to our panelists, thanks for the trenchant comments and remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, and I'd just like to say one more time, please join us for the reception afterwards upstairs on the 18th floor. Good evening.